Most people misunderstand quiet people. They assume silence means weakness. They assume distance means disinterest. They assume stillness means nothing is happening inside. But the truth is far more unsettling. Some of the most powerful minds in human history were not loud. They were not socially dominant in the way people expect. They were observers. They were thinkers. They were people who said less but saw more. And this is where the misunderstanding begins. Because in a world addicted to noise, the quiet person looks invisible. But invisibility is not absence. It is awareness. Think about the last time you were in a crowded room. People talking over each other. Phones vibrating. Laughter filling the gaps. And in the middle of it all, there is usually one person who is not trying to dominate anything. They are watching, reading the room, not reacting too quickly, not chasing attention. Most people assume that person is passive. But psychologically, something very different is happening. The brain of a quiet observer is not idle. It is processing. It is scanning micro-expressions, tone shifts, emotional inconsistencies. Neuroscience shows that highly observant individuals often activate deeper pattern recognition networks when exposed to social environments. They are not distracted. They are decoding. While others are participating in the surface of reality, they are studying its structure. And this is the first hidden truth. People think power comes from being noticed. But real psychological power often comes from noticing everything. There is a reason some people feel drained after social interaction while others feel energized. It is not just personality. It is cognitive load. Extroverted behavior often relies on external stimulation to regulate dopamine. Quiet individuals often regulate internally, through reflection, imagination, and mental simulation. This is why silence is not emptiness. It is internal processing. But here is where things get more interesting. Because society rewards visibility, not depth. From childhood, attention is trained like currency. The louder child gets noticed. The more expressive child gets rewarded. The more socially dominant child is labeled confident. And the quiet child learns something different. They learn to observe before speaking, to think before reacting, to detach before engaging. Not because they are weak, but because they are processing risk. Psychologists often link this behavior to higher sensitivity in threat detection systems. The brain becomes more selective with social output. Words are not cheap. Attention is not free. Expression becomes intentional. And over time, something powerful develops. Self-containment. Not silence out of fear. Silence out of control. But this is where most people misunderstand introversion completely. They think quiet people are avoiding life. The reality is they are filtering it. And that filtering process creates something most people never develop: emotional precision. While others react instantly, quiet individuals tend to delay response. That delay is not hesitation. It is computation. It is the mind running scenarios, predicting outcomes, measuring emotional consequences. In behavioral psychology, this connects to something called cognitive reflection, the ability to pause instinct and evaluate deeper truth before responding. And in real life, that changes everything. Because the world does not reward the fastest reaction. It rewards the most accurate one. Think about conversations where emotions escalate. Most people speak to win, to defend, to react. But a quiet mind often speaks to understand. And understanding gives leverage. Not the kind of leverage people see, but the kind people feel. There is a moment in every social environment where silence becomes more powerful than speech. When someone says something emotional, provocative, or impulsive, and instead of reacting, the quiet person simply observes. That pause changes the entire energy of the room, because silence forces reflection in others. And most people are not comfortable with their own thoughts, so they fill silence with words. But quiet individuals learn to sit in it. And that ability alone creates psychological dominance without aggression. But there is another layer most people never consider. Introverts are not just observers of others. They are observers of themselves. And self-observation is where transformation begins. Because while external validation is loud and unstable, internal awareness is quiet and consistent. A person who understands their own emotional patterns does not need constant external confirmation. They notice their triggers. They notice their avoidance. They notice their desire for approval before it controls them. This creates emotional independence. And emotional independence is rare. Most people are unconsciously driven by social comparison loops. Studies in social psychology show that repeated exposure to curated lives, especially through digital platforms, increases internal dissatisfaction and external validation-seeking behavior. But quiet minds tend to step outside that loop more often, not because they are immune, but because they disengage faster. They retreat into internal environments where comparison loses power, where reflection replaces reaction. And this is where introversion becomes a form of protection, not from people, from manipulation, because when you are less reactive, you are harder to influence. And in a world built on attention capture, that is a hidden advantage. But there is still something deeper. Quiet people often carry a misunderstood emotional life. On the surface, they may appear calm, controlled, detached, but internally their emotional world can be intense. Not chaotic, but deep. They feel things fully, but process them privately. This creates a unique psychological tension, because expression is not the same as experience. And many introverts experience life internally first, externally later. This is why they often seem delayed in emotional response. It is not absence. It is translation. The mind takes time to convert feeling into expression. And that translation process builds emotional intelligence. Because when you delay expression, you gain clarity over impulse. And impulse is where most emotional mistakes begin. Think about regret. Most regret does not come from thinking too much. It comes from reacting too fast. And quiet individuals naturally reduce that risk. But there is a cost. Because in a world that equates loudness with presence, quiet people often feel unseen. And that feeling can slowly shape identity. A person who is constantly overlooked may begin to question their value. They may start to believe that being heard requires being louder, that being respected requires being more visible. But psychology tells a different story. Presence is not volume. Presence is impact. And impact does not always announce itself. Some people change rooms by speaking. Others change rooms by staying silent. And the silent presence often lasts longer in memory, because the brain remembers emotional contrast, not noise. There is also a deeper behavioral shift that happens with quiet individuals over time. They become selective with energy. Not everyone gets access to their attention. Not every environment gets their participation. Not every opinion gets a reaction. And this selectivity creates boundaries. Boundaries that most loud personalities struggle to build. Because when you are used to constant external engagement, saying no feels like loss. But when you are comfortable with solitude, saying no feels like control. And control over attention is one of the highest forms of psychological autonomy. But here is the part most people never realize. Quiet individuals often develop stronger long-term thinking. Because they are not constantly pulled into immediate social stimulation, their mind has more space to simulate future outcomes, to imagine consequences, to build internal models of reality. This is where creativity often emerges, not from noise, but from distance. Many of the world's most innovative thinkers were not constantly in conversation. They were in observation. They were in reflection. They were in solitude long enough for ideas to form without interruption. And that is where depth is born. Because depth requires space, and space requires silence. But silence in modern life is rare. Everything is designed to interrupt thought. Notifications, opinions, constant input, continuous comparison. And in that environment, the quiet mind becomes even more powerful. Because it resists overload. It filters. It slows down. And in slowing down, it sees what others miss. Patterns, intentions, emotional undercurrents. But there is also a psychological burden that comes with awareness. Because seeing more does not always feel better. Sometimes it means noticing inconsistencies others ignore. It means feeling social fatigue earlier. It means withdrawing when others are still engaged. And that can create misunderstanding. People may interpret distance as arrogance. But in reality, it is regulation. Emotional regulation is not withdrawal from life. It is management of internal energy. And those who master it often appear calm under pressure. Not because they feel less, but because they process more before reacting. And this brings us to a deeper truth. Quiet power is not about personality type. It is about control of attention. Because where your attention goes, your life follows. Most people lose attention constantly. They scatter it across conversations, screens, comparisons, and reactions. But quiet individuals often reclaim it. They direct it inward first. And that inward direction creates clarity. Clarity about what matters, what does not, what deserves response, what deserves silence. And over time, this creates something powerful. Identity stability. A person who is not constantly shaped by external reaction becomes harder to manipulate, harder to pressure, and harder to destabilize. But there is still one final misunderstanding to clear. Quiet does not mean disconnected. It means intentional. When a quiet person speaks, it often carries weight. Not because of volume, but because of restraint. Because words were chosen, not spilled. And in a world full of constant noise, restraint becomes rare. And rarity becomes value. So the next time you see someone who does not speak much, do not assume absence. Assume depth. Because behind that silence, there may be a mind observing patterns you have not noticed yet. Emotions you have not named yet. Truths you have not considered yet. And maybe the real question is not why they are quiet, but what they have learned to stop reacting to. Because in the end, the most powerful people are not always the loudest in the room. They are often the ones who no longer feel the need to prove they belong in it. And if you listen closely, silence is never empty. It is full of everything most people are too distracted to hear. So ask yourself this. Are you speaking to be heard? Or are you speaking because silence makes you uncomfortable? And if this made you reflect even a little, stay with this kind of thinking.